Good
Ready.
morning. Good morning. I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of the co-sponsors of this event, the Minerals, Materials, and Society program at the University of Delaware, the Environmental Peacebuilding Association, and the Biden School at the University of Delaware. I co-chair the education interest group of the Environmental Peacebuilding Association, and I'm also on the faculty at the University of Delaware. I just want to briefly mention about the Environmental Peacebuilding Association and hope you'll join if you're not already a member. The Environmental Peacebuilding Association was launched on Earth Day in 2018 to coalesce a vast community of practice around environmental peacebuilding, of finding ways to build peace as opposed to be just stuck in conflict around contentious areas of natural resources and the environment. The Environmental Peacebuilding Association has a website, which I will put in the chat. And on the website, you'll find extensive resources through its library and also different interest groups. And the education interest group, which I co-chair, has current projects now of exploring the toolkits of environmental peacebuilding, of exploring the syllabi. We hope very much that you will join if you're not already a member. And now I would like to pass this to Saleem, who organized this conference today and is director of the Minerals, Materials, and Society program at the University of Delaware.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Greetings, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you all on part one of this two-part symposium on frontier issues in the mineral sector. The goal of this symposium is really to harness those energies from the Environmental Peacebuilding Association around problem solving and trying to see if there are opportunities for convergence around very difficult social and environmental issues. So my own background is in environmental planning, and I've been trained as a mediator as well. And so I come to this from that perspective, having done research on corporate community conflicts for the past 20 years or so. Most of my research has been on terrestrial mining, and I came to this area of deep sea mining partly through my role with the United Nations. I serve on the UN's International Resource Panel and also on the science panel for the Global Environmental Facility. And in that role, one of our efforts has been to engage with small island developing states. This deep sea mining arena is one where, as part of any development, there needs to be a public-private partnership of sorts between the international community and sponsoring states within the UN system who are parties to the Law of the Sea Convention and private contractors. So in that capacity, I have been involved in also trying to advise some of these companies as well as the governments, especially 3 small island developing states, around how to approach the environmental impact assessment process. So just to give that for full disclosure. However, I come to this primarily as an academic who is very interested in looking at how science can inform policy and development most constructively. That doesn't mean always we're going to have solutions, but it does mean that we should find the most efficient pathway forward. So with that in mind, we're really very pleased to have 3 distinguished speakers who will cover this issue from different perspectives. And our goal is very much to see where that convergence may be possible and where it may not be possible. So in that regard, first of all, I'm going to introduce the speakers as they speak. Our first speaker is Winnie Ye from the World Economic Forum. Most of you will know the World Economic Forum from their annual flagship summit in Davos, which I have had the pleasure of attending in the past. And at that, there are multi-stakeholder platforms all over the world, but the forum has really crafted a niche for itself where business and governments can come together at a very high level. And that has, of course, evoked its own controversies, which I'm very familiar of, and I don't want to romanticize. But at the same time, they do hold a certain very important pedestal. Winnie has been working on their Oceans Initiative She's herself an electrical engineer, a graduate of the University of Michigan, but she has spent a lot of time interacting with stakeholders and is coordinating 3 important reports on this sector. So she's going to tell you more about that. Winnie, we're delighted to have you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Saleem, for the kind introduction. Let me just share my screen with everyone, because sometimes with these things, it's easier to have imagery to help understand what's going on. So I'm going to talk about deep sea minerals. And the question we're asking is, should they be developed? And if so, how? And these are controversial questions, questions which we don't have the answer yet, but it may have lasting impacts for generations to come. And how then should we decide, or rather who should decide, and who should be included in this decision-making process? The World Economic Forum is building an impartial space to inform and engage with downstream companies who use metals today and the metal exchanges that trade them. And let me start with a very brief overview of what deep sea minerals are and why they're controversial. So firstly, I'll note there's no commercial deep sea mining today, and the discussions on deep sea mining on whether this industry should begin, and if so, under which conditions. The minerals found in the deep sea are manganese, cobalt, copper, nickel, lithium, and zinc. And you've probably heard that these are the very same metals often mentioned as materials for electric vehicle batteries and other green technology. And cobalt and nickel here have a special attention because of the forecasted demand increase. Overall, there are 3 types of deep sea mineral deposits. We have listed here the cobalt-rich crust, polymetallic nodules, and polymetallic sulfides, where Erika from Deep Green later will talk more about polymetallic nodules. So I won't go too deep into the different types because of our time constraint today, but a little about where they are found in the world. You can see on this map, there are 3 different colors of the 3 mineral deposit types mentioned earlier. And important to note, the light blue area here is the national country's exclusive economic zone, where they can make the decision on regulation for mining. And outside of that, you have the area beyond national jurisdiction, sometimes referred to as A, B, and J. And decision-making there lies in an international body called the International Seabed Authority. So who makes decisions depends on where the mineral deposits are found. And one thing else mentioned later today, you may hear the CCZ, the Clearing Clipperton Zone. This is that area in the Pacific circled in black dotted line in dark blue. This is one area that Erika may talk a bit more about where they're doing exploration. So we talked about what the minerals are, where they are. So what is the issue? And I'm going to say, I won't be able to do justice to the complexity of the political, scientific, economic, and social landscape being discussed. But I just want to highlight a few things relevant to our work. In the last 4 months, we had reports from WWF, Greenpeace, Amnesty International, and a group of Pacific organizations that published either reports or public statements calling for a moratorium, a precautionary pause, or a total ban on deep sea mining. And this has increased the media attention on these minerals in the recent months. And just this morning, we got news that 4 major companies, BMW Group, Volvo Group, Google, Samsung, SDI, have all announced their support for a moratorium and that they're refusing deep sea minerals in their supply chain. The cause for the moratorium is based on a lack of knowledge on the ecosystem, the environmental effects of mining, and other concerns on governance. These groups cite that deep sea scientists have showed us the ecosystems are unique and fragile, and that recovery is long and slow. Yet there's another side to this issue, and opinions that are equally strongly held. Proponents for deep sea mining point out the future metal demand forecast. They talked about the trade-off of mining on land versus sea, and the role that industry plays today in gathering scientific knowledge in new fields, and especially this one too. These proponents include the seabed mining contractors, such as Deep Green, that I'll speak later today, the governments that are sponsoring exploration, and scientists and other players in the seabed mining industry. And it's a truly complex topic. It's a, how do you weigh, sorry, with slides, how do you weigh the biodiversity losses in the deep sea with the need for battery metals? And how do you compare the economic benefit to small island developing states to that of these existing mining countries? And the topic becomes even more complex when you consider that some of these minerals are in an area that's designated as the common heritage for humanity. So this, the way of making a decision for all humankind, now and future, is one that will follow this topic of deep sea minerals. And it seems like we may have a standstill situation. Could there be any common ground between moratorium groups and mining interest? The approach we're taking from the forum is to bring in additional voices, voices that are not immediately for nor against seabed mining. And these voices include downstream consumer brands that are today using metals like cobalt and nickel. These are the electric vehicle companies, the electronics companies, the battery manufacturers and users. These are brands such as BMW, Tesla, Google, Microsoft, and many others. And these brands, they need to balance on the one hand, commercial considerations, and on the other hand, the expectations of their stakeholders. Aside from their consumers, often the stakeholders also include environmental organizations that are warning against the risk of seabed mining. And their commercial considerations also include the cost and material availability issues that are raised by the mining interest, and often others such as ESG and regulatory demands. So they're placed to weigh both voices and also add considerations on their own. And the market exchanges that trade metals have a similar balance to make. These groups, 2 decades ago, they would have only seen themselves as a passive recipient of materials and way up in the supply chain. And they may have felt no rights or responsibilities and no influence to the decision-making process. This is no longer the case today. Today, both of these groups are now active in setting soft, voluntary standards for sourcing, and sometimes even influencing hard legislation. For over a decade, the OEM brands have took part in setting standards for and implementing requirements on their mineral sources from land. And similarly, the metal markets are increasingly requiring their listed brands to meet certain ESG requirements. And this, for example, we have the London Metal Exchange's responsible sourcing requirements. So these groups, the manufacturing brands and the metal markets, are legitimate voices in this discussion. And it's important that they are asking these questions, questions of, should deep sea minerals be accepted in our supply chains? And if so, under which conditions? In this, the World Economic Forum is hosting a dialogue. This is our Deep Sea Minerals Dialogue. It's a dialogue to offer impartial space for these new voices to learn about the topic and their stake in it. In this highly controversial and heated topic, we're creating a private space where questions can be asked and discussed with the time and mind space it needs. Importantly, I do not tell these stakeholders how they must act, and instead, we're offering information in a way that is fact-based and highlights how it's relevant to them. We're presenting information so they understand their stake in it, and for these groups to collectively figure out how to take action, knowing that each of them may come up with a different solution. However, we're placing emphasis on the importance for this to be for the benefit of sound decision for all humanity and planet Earth. With these additional voices added, we can encourage now moving from a two-way debate to a multi-stakeholder dialogue. Their voices and their needs, which often reflects the balance of the expectations of the civil society stakeholders and also their own business considerations, These are valid needs that must be included in the discussion. And to sum up, to move this from a debate to a dialogue, to move forward and finding a path for this topic, we have to acknowledge that it's not a straightforward issue, and that the knowledge we have about deep sea biology and the environmental effects today are still being developed. And the information we may have about benefits and how to weigh these benefits against the costs are still thin. We're in an information-starved situation, and in such situations, participatory decision-making process is even the more important. So private businesses, these responsible businesses that care about their sourcing, should be part of the decision-making process. And often in the past, they've entered late into the discussion, after these decisions on operations have already been taken. But this topic of deep sea minerals is a rare opportunity they can have a say before an industry begins. So these responsible businesses need to take this opportunity in a way that promotes good decision-making for all humanity and our planet. And this is how we can move from a debate to a dialogue on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Winnie, for setting the stage so articulately. Okay, now we do have the chat open, so I would encourage all of you to engage. We want this to be a community event. I'm not going to open the mics for questions, but we will use the chat for questions as well as comments. People want to share links and so on. So I would encourage you to do that. The chat is visible to all the speakers as well as to the attendees. So our next speaker is Sean Owen, who is the director of the Deep-Sea Conservation Coalition based in the Netherlands. She has a distinguished career in ocean conservation, has worked previously with the World Wildlife Fund, originally from Canada. She has been involved in basically shepherding a lot of the NGO coalitions who are working on this topic from all over the world. So she's going to give us her perspectives and those of her organization regarding the environmental concerns on this topic. Sean, over to you.
Thank you very much, Saleem, and hello, everyone. And thank you, Winnie, for a wonderful opening presentation that I'm excited to build from. I will just share my screen now. There we go. Can you see that? Perfect.
Yes, very good.
So I would just like to say, I think there are a few themes that Winnie touched on that I hope I can elaborate on in my presentation today. And in particular, we heard a lot about the complexity of the topic, something about the risk as well. And for me, a theme throughout was transparency. And we, the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition, very much appreciates the transparency that the World Economic Forum is bringing to this discussion through their dialogue and their forum. So very quickly, who are we? We are a coalition of over 90 organizations, and since 2004, we have worked together to focus both on substantially reducing the greatest threats to the deep sea and on safeguarding the long-term health and integrity and resilience of the deep sea ecosystems. And this is a quick glance at all of who we are, which you can find on our website. So what is the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition calling for? Our stand at this point, and we've been working on deep seabed mining issue for about 8 years now. We did not come into it calling for a moratorium. This call for a moratorium, effectively a pause on any activity, and I'll go into a little bit more what that means. This arose about 2 years ago on the basis of scientific research and a number of the conversations and negotiations that we had been involved in up to that point. So we're calling for a moratorium unless and until a number of conditions are met. Firstly, that the environmental, economic, and social risks are fully understood. Secondly, we would like to ensure or see ensured that effective protection of the marine environment will be assured if mining progresses, and that there is no loss of biodiversity. In this time of converging biodiversity and climate crises, we cannot solve one at the expense of the other. Our third condition, if you like, for a moratorium to potentially be lifted would be free prior informed consent of Indigenous peoples and any communities likely to be affected by the mining. Fourth, we're calling for alternatives to be fully explored and applied. Do we need these new metals to come out of the ground when in fact we have alternative ways of supplying our needs for connectivity and mobility in the 21st century? Our fifth call for the lifting of a moratorium would be for broad informed public support to be secured. So an effective consultation process. As Winnie noted, the main activities are in the area of the international seabed outside of national jurisdiction. That means that it's the common heritage of humankind. And the International Seabed Authority, which is mandated to manage the seafloor on behalf of humankind, has the obligation to ensure that any mining benefits humankind as a whole. And finally, we are looking for comprehensive reform of the ISA, and specifically with a view to transparent, accountable, inclusive, and environmentally responsible decision-making from this regulatory body that is responsible for such a vast portion of our planet. So what is a healthy deep sea? What is at stake here? The deep sea is the area of the ocean, which is 90% of the marine environment, 200 meters to 11 kilometers below the surface of the ocean. That is 90% of the area of our planet that can support life. So it's home to the greatest diversity of species and ecosystems on Earth, contrary to what some who are proposing to go and mine will have you believe, and contrary to what we thought until just a few decades ago. Each of the nodules that the miners are talking about harvesting, and in fact, I would use the word mining rather than harvesting, from the deep is a tiny ecosystem unto itself. Moreover, a healthy ocean absorbs a vast amount of the carbon that we're putting into our atmosphere. It holds great economic value in terms of fisheries, in terms of livelihoods for coastal communities across the planet, and pharmaceutical value as well. One of the key components of the COVID-19 test came from the deep sea. It also has enormous cultural value, and it's a cornerstone of our collective existence, and as we said, the common heritage of humankind. Finally, it is extremely fragile and vulnerable. Tests of trawl drags that took place in the 1970s, we've seen scientific research that shows that there is nothing that comes back in decades. This is not an opportunity for restoration. Any damage that is done in the deep sea because of the intrinsic characteristics of the way that life moves in that area, it is not, any damage is irreversible, excuse me. So what would be the impacts of opening a new extractive frontier in this space? The International Seabed Authority told us in 2018 that a single seabed mining operation will cover some 8,000 to 9,000 square kilometers of seabed over the course of a 25 to 30-year contract. And there are 30 of these contracts currently awarded for exploration at this point. The expectation is that these exploration contracts will convert into exploitation contracts. So what will this cause? It will cause physical damage to biodiversity on the seafloor, which scientists are telling us will be severe and irreversible. It will also cause other environmental damage, such as sediment plumes in the mid-water column, which could spread thousands of kilometers across the sea. There will be noise and light brought to these areas of utter peace, utter darkness, utter silence in the deep. And these mining operations will be going 24/7 over the course of the 25 to 30-year contract. Possibly toxins as well. What we also understand that the impacts of opening this new extractive frontier will not include is a reduction of the issues associated with terrestrial mining. So sometimes the two are put up against each other. And we're told that mining the deep sea will take the pressure off the terrible human rights and environmental abuses going on in some parts of the world. If you listen to the communities in the Congo and other areas, they're not asking for mining to be stopped. They're asking for those processes to be improved, those systems to be improved to protect their incomes and their livelihoods and their health. So are there alternatives to seabed mining? So a subsidiary of Deep Green, and you'll hear from Erika just after I speak, and I believe you're an advisor to Deep Green as well, Saleem. A subsidiary of Deep Green, the Tonga Offshore Minerals Limited, has said it is true that there are enough metal-bearing deposits on land to meet the needs of the clean energy transition. As we heard from Winnie, BMW, Volvo, Samsung, and Google, as of today, have committed not to source any minerals from the seabed, to exclude such minerals from their supply chains, and not to finance DSM activities. So clearly, they think that there are alternatives to continuing their supply. Also last week, we heard from a wide range of civil society groups in the Pacific region calling for seabed mining to be banned across the globe. Not just a moratorium or a temporary pause, but a ban. So it must be that they also see that there are alternatives to their economic livelihoods. So what is a solution then from our perspective? A 21st century solution to delivering on our mobility and connectivity needs. We know that Tesla, that companies in China, that IBM are coming up with all sorts of exciting technological alternatives to nickel and cobalt and some of the other key metals that are potentially sourced from the deep sea. So the technological future is highly uncertain even in 2 years, let alone in a couple of decades. We see that a closed loop economy could create much stronger, much more resilience to metal shortages, to price fluctuations. So this is by no means the only or even the best answer to solving our decarbonization challenge as a planet. We would say instead that there is a much more strategic global approach possible to mineral resource production, extraction, use, and reuse. And we are part of a number of discussions with UN agencies and with other bodies focused exactly on this opportunity. So I'll leave you with a final quote from Dr. Diva Amon, one of the 500 or so deep sea biologists focused on this part of the world. And she says, "We cannot protect what we don't know, manage what we do not understand, or sustainably steward what we do not value. If we continue blindly and irresponsibly with business as usual, we could cause irreparable damage and lose parts of our planet before we truly know them." Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean, for those valuable perspectives. And as I had noted in my intro, my advisory role to Deep Green has been largely because of the partnership with the small island states that 3 of the small island states have had. So I'm not on any payroll. I don't own any stock or anything like that. I do appreciate that they have supported research around ocean science, as have governments, as have lots of entities. Each has certain agendas, but my involvement is entirely on helping with research, in fact, peer-reviewed papers, which have been ongoing. So just to clarify on that, and the interest is, in terms of this platform, is to make sure we have all the different perspectives presented. All right, so now to introduce Erika Ilves, who is the head of strategy for Deep Green Metals, that is now soon to become the Metals Company, and she may say a few words about that. Erika has a background in strategy with McKinsey and has been involved in a lot of these sort of frontier technology issues. She's worked on space mining also, which will be the topic of the second portion of our symposium that will be later this day. For those of you who are interested, I would encourage you to join that part too. She has also worked on artificial intelligence in many other sectors, currently based in Dubai, originally from Estonia. Erika, delighted to have you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Saleem. I thought I'd maybe say a couple of words on, how I ended up. I have no intention of, presenting a company view, because given that, this is really less about specific company goals or objectives, and it's really more at a fundamental societal level, what are we going to do over the next 20, 30 years? For the last maybe 15 years, have been the prime driver behind all the choices, at least I make in my life, are driven by a fundamental fear and concern about the existential risk we face as a species today. You know, my engagement in space mining robotics was coming from that point, for that point of reference. And the way I ended up in seafloor, or specific, not seafloor minerals, I think there is more common ground that probably I and Sean would have around different categories and the approach than may appear from the outset. But the way I ended up in deep sea minerals is I was actually in the development of our space mining robots. We were working for terrestrial mining companies. So I spent quite many months underground with robots trying to figure out how we could reduce the human environmental cost of mining today. And, you know, frankly, it disabused me of any, for a while, of any desire to spend my, you know, lifetime on space mining until we figure out some issues on Earth, because I think they are, they definitely, many of them are existential. So I think maybe the context that I'm missing a little bit here in this discussion that I would love if you allow me to add is, you know, we can't speak about deep sea mining as a category as a whole and outside of the context of what's, you know, what we actually need. So if you allow me, I will, I think we're, you know, hopefully all of us on this call would agree that the clean energy transition is something that is needs to happen, and it needs to happen on a pretty rapid schedule, perhaps faster than you know, than is currently happening. Saleem, I just have a little question. It says that sharing is paused. Does that mean that you guys don't see anything?
Sorry, yes, we can see your slides, but they're not in the presentation mode. But you can click through, it should work. I haven't paused anything.
Okay. Yeah, so just very quickly in terms of context, because I think it's important that we approach these difficult choices in the light of the context. So the clean energy transition is very metal intensive. You know, if you look at some of the metals contained in electric vehicles, these are, you know, up to 5 times more metal requirement. On power plants, you know, it's kind of traditional fossil fuel power production versus our clean alternatives. They all require metal. And I think, you know, it's the scale here is sometimes where things get bogged down a little bit, because the scale of the energy system transition is already a Herculean task. And then if you take that transition and associate it with metal need, it's actually, like, if you really sit down and start breaking it down and where this is going to come from, it's not as easy. And I think where me and Sean probably will agree, we will need all of the alternatives. You know, from different battery chemistries to hydrogen-powered car. I mean, we're going to need every single idea on this planet, because within the next 30 years, this is not going to be an easy task, and definitely not going to come from a single battery chemistry or a single solution. So, you know, the reason why, you know, polymetallic nodules come into question is, other than the low end of electric vehicles today, the chemistries are very nickel rich. Here's just an example of an average NMC cathode battery kind of requirements, 155 kilograms.
So Erika, you might have to click on that slide, because we're just seeing the first slide right now.
Okay. I don't know why it doesn't.
It may be a bandwidth issue on your end.
Let me try and reshare.
Otherwise, you can email me now it's fine. Yep, go ahead. Now you can, we see the slide which says 85 kg, 56
so
kg.
155 kilograms and an average size. And you can, you know, hopefully, as battery chemistries develop, I think what you're going to see is nickel requirements may go down next decades, and manganese is going to come up. But, you know, batteries need to be made of something, and there are only that many elements on the table. So we know there, you know, if we are transitioning, the metal requirements are not going to go away. I think the good news is, and I think where maybe Sean and I could also find common ground, is one of the urgent tasks that we have with the clean energy transition is to make sure that every single metal we put into the system is then not lost from the system, right? Because the more successful we are at making sure that we recycle every metal atom, the shorter the lifetime of an extractive industry is going to be. So that's I'm sure we're going to be super aligned on this one. So in one way to think about the metal problem of the clean energy transition is that it's it's by no, I mean, there's going to be no sustainable solutions. I think that's another bit that often gets lost. Like as long as we're extracting from anywhere, land or deep sea, that it's not sustainable, no matter how well you do it. The issue is how can we bridge to full recyclability of the stock that we have in the system as fast as possible, and that's where putting in recycling requirements now is, we'll put an end date to will reduce the metals extractive to a marginal activity as opposed to the massive growth that we're seeing today. So it's difficult to get around this one, and if you ramp up all of the production, all of the current projects we have, and we to pick two metals that are key here. I'm less I think cobalt can be managed, but nickel and copper, you're looking at 40 to 35% deficits from 2030, and I'm not sure we can innovate our way out of this one. And this, the important thing to understand is this metal is going to come out, whether it's going to, if you take nickel, whether we're going to come out of Indonesian rainforests or from polymetallic nodules, but it is going to come out in order for us to transition. I'm not going to dwell on the ESG impacts on conventional mining, but they're worth dwelling on because, it's one thing to see the pictures, it's another thing to actually be on the ground and see what all of this means in practice. And very often, if you take the case of Indonesia, you would not be allowed to go and see. We've tried. And so we tried, as a company, we've invested in trying to characterize, the alternatives that we have on the table for the 1 billion electric vehicle scenario. And you can play around with the numbers. It doesn't matter whether it's 1 billion. I think we'd be lucky if we only built 1 billion electric vehicles. Maybe less, maybe, but just as a reference point. This is drawn to scale the impact of building 1 billion electric vehicles with the pretty optimistic scenario in terms of green energy grids. If we just proceed with the solutions we have right now. So at least we as a company, for us, polymetallic nodules is an opportunity to reduce, a lot of these footprints, not all, and there are bits that are very, very problematic, and I'll get to them in a second. So in terms of availability, polymetallic nodules, polymetallic nodule resource that is located in the Clarion-Clipperton zone and happens to have the highest concentration of copper and nickel in a single resource. There's enough resource to electrify the entire fleet many times over. Fortunately, hopefully we won't need all of it. But I think a lot of there's a lot of focus on the environment and less focus on the resource and on what it allows you to do. The nodules sit unattached to the seafloor, so we're not drilling or blasting. I know Sean said that you would call what we propose to do on the seafloor not as harvesting but as mining. Having been together with miners underground trying to blast hard rock, I would say it's almost a tiny bit disrespectful to the difficulty of the task that they have, that we don't really, we wouldn't have in this place. But it has high grades of 4 metals in a single ore. That makes a huge difference in terms of environmental footprints that come on the tail of it. And one of the issues we've been advocating is, don't support any form of mining, support standards or targets for different impacts, and then see how, how different sources play out. This particular resource has no hazardous elements. It allows to solve, one of the biggest issues terrestrial mining has, which is tailings. It is the single biggest generator of industrial waste on the planet. It's almost 200 gigatons is generated from terrestrial mining each year that we then put somewhere, very often into our rivers and oceans and ecosystems, or dams that we need to maintain indefinitely. There are many other advantages, but what they all result in, and that's kind of where, I guess, where the controversy lies. On the one hand, it allows you to compress on a life cycle basis, it allows you to compress a lot of known impacts of terrestrial mining. And I would say, given just the scale of the compression, at the very least, it deserves a hearing. The issue where it does not, it creates a new issue and it doesn't solve the biodiversity loss issue. If we start with biodiversity loss, I don't think there is a single miner on this planet that can guarantee you with absolute certainty that their activities do not lead to biodiversity loss. It's just, to do that, we would have to have complete inventories. And, in today's environment, we've never done complete inventories of all species in any given site, as far as I.
Erika, 2 minutes. Warning.
Yeah, the issue, the big issue that, so it can solve many of these issues, but then creates another. It's a very different type of use of the seafloor. It dramatically extends compared to deep sea tailings placement today. It dramatically extends the seafloor usage. And, our planet is a fascinating place. It's, it's not a lifeless seafloor. It doesn't have a lot of life, but it's, and we haven't had any, presence at 4 kilometers depth before. So, there's been a lot of research, but there's not been a lot of commercial operations of any kind at that depth to have full understanding of what the impacts, are going to be. So this is just a visual to kind of help you see that on some of the impact compression. But if we focus on the seafloor, which I guess is where, controversy lies. So it's for the 1 billion EV scenario, it's a pretty large area that would be disturbed on an economic allocation basis. If you compare land versus, percentage of land versus percentage of ocean, it's still comparable, but it's besides the point. I guess it's ultimately the functioning of these ecosystems that we need to protect and worry about. Some of the misunderstandings that often people describe ocean function in terms of how it stores carbon. However, in this particular type of operations, we do not think carbon sinks or will be impacted in any way. There are just no known mechanisms for the sediment to rise to 4,000 meters up. And this is one of the least populated places on the planet. It's the same level of biomass as you will see in the deserts and in the ice-free Arctic. I'll just, maybe last two things I'd say. There are impacts that are important and need to be studied. And I think the entire industry is currently focused on understanding the impact of nodule removal, understanding the impact of and characterizing the impact of sediment disturbance. We're still trying to figure out what to do with return water, and what is the depth of, that would least cause least damage. And, we sometimes, there's a lot of talk about mining, but fundamentally we are a ocean science company at the moment. That's where most of the time, money is spent today. As I'm speaking to you now, that our boat is with 57 scientists aboard in the CCZ doing pelagic studies, just characterizing the environment and baselining so that we can figure out, how we can take care of that environment. I think that's, I guess, my main message. And if we find out that net, this is not a good solution, then I think us and many other contractors would stand down. That's the bottom line.
Thank you, Erika, for providing some updates on the research you're doing as well. So we have some questions that are coming up as well, but what I would like to do is, some people are putting comments, which is great. You're welcome to do that too. But I wanted to go back to the Law of the Sea Convention and the point Sean raised about the governance of these resources. And Sean, you had specially noted that you want reform in the ISA. It would be helpful, I think, for the audience to know what some of those reforms you would like are, because that's something within the coming year which may well be deliberated.
Sure, thank you for that question, Saleem, and really appreciate all of the various notes, questions, and comments in the chat box. So do keep those coming as well. So we have, as I said, been involved with the International Seabed Authority for about 8 years, and the Deepsea Conservation Coalition has observer status there, as do a number of our member organizations as well. So we have been participating in the meetings of the body. The governance structure of the International Authority, it has 3 main decision-making bodies. There's the Legal and Technical Council, which is the strategic guiding body, if you like. That meets behind closed doors. And despite calls from the council, which is the second sort of governing structure, and the assembly, which is the third, and the assembly is made up of the 167 member states, as well as the EU. So both the assembly and the council have called on the Legal and Technical Commission to have meetings transparent, openly, and this has not yet happened. So one key aspect of our call is transparency. Secondly, the decisions made by the International Seabed Authority are not informed by an environment or a scientific committee. So a number of the other UN agencies, international organizations charged with stewardship of the ocean have such a body. We've called for a number of years for the ISA to institute one as well, so far with no effect. Furthermore, the structure of the International Seabed Authority is very pro-mining. It was set up in 1982 at a time when, during the time of the Cold War, at a time when actually mining the deep seabed was not a real prospect at that time. And furthermore, in the context of much less knowledge than we know now about what the deep sea contains, and what the value of a healthy ocean is to our planet and humanity. So the structure of these decision-making bodies is heavily biased toward countries that want to mine. And as a result, the decision-making is not fair to the bulk of humankind and to the countries who do not attend these meetings or are not part of the process. So these are some of the key elements that we would like to see reformed.
Great, thank you so much for those specifics, and I hope that there will be a process on engagement with that in the ISA as well, and that's another kind of area the Environmental Peacebuilding Association is very interested in researching on.
Saleem, excuse me, Saleem, I'm sorry. One other point to answer your question. There are actually 2 other aspects to the negotiations that are ongoing, which also need much more time and attention to. One is the liability question. So if mining begins and if accidents happen, as they do, where will the liability sit? That has not been answered, nor has the question of financial or benefit sharing from any activities. If and when mining takes place and profits are accrued, how is that distributed across humankind? And how is that shared? So these are really important questions that have a long way to go before they're answered.
Great, yes, and if any of the other speakers and participants have responses to what the points Sean has raised, please put them in the chat. I'm trying to make multitasking efficient use of time. Some of the questions are around contestations in science. So, Erika said the carbon sequestration is not a problem. There are other scientists who say we're not sure. Some say there's some tentative evidence. So one of the questions I think operationally from a conflict resolution perspective would be, how do you get consensus around science? And one of the reasons I got involved in this is because one of the methods we use is life cycle analysis and doing comparisons across using industrial ecology techniques. So I would like to pose this question to Winnie, because World Economic Forum has a whole operation which deals with scientists. They have the young scientists, they have the Global Future Council on Scientific Cooperation. Winnie, could you comment on how the forum is approaching these contested views of science?
Thank you, Saleem, for the question. Yes, science is very important in the decision-making of this process. And as you noted, there are already many scientists. As Sean also noted, there are already more than 500 deep sea biologists studying this. And our stance on this is that decision-making process must include the scientific community and the result of that. And the role we're playing on this topic in particular is we're working to engage downstream companies into this topic because many scientists are already engaged at ISA and other forums. But what we're focusing on is adding additional voices that are not today in this conversation yet.
Okay, very good. But you, at this point, you don't have a particular platform for getting consensus on science where, there may be disagreements between equally eminent scientists. And, how do you try to get some convergence on it? So maybe that's another action item we can think about from this, is looking for opportunities around that. So some of the questions also pertain specifically, Erika, to the transformation of Deep Green to the metals company and the merger to form a SPAC. Could you comment on the SPAC? And this is a new sort of boutique product on investment, relatively new, that has been coming out. Maybe a word or two on SPACs and what's particularly clear. And the question is, how are investors reacting to this and so on? No, sorry, muted. You're muted.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I can answer the question. I'm not sure that contributes to our environmental debate, but.
Well, I think the part you may want to comment on is that the SPAC that you are involved with has said they are pitched as a social and environmentally responsible investment instrument.
Yeah, they were the first ESG or focused SPAC on the market. So that was one of the things that appealed to us. And I've seen in the chat, one of the comments was, with the billions of dollars of valuation, how could you, wouldn't you have pressure to, kind of veer aside from some of the comments that I've just made on this call? That was part of the reason, that was part of our choice of our partners in this journey, people who actually understand the complexity of the choices ahead of us. And, there are no guarantees. And that was definitely part of the discussion. It would be a catastrophe for everyone if, as a result of our activity, we have a net negative impact on the planet, on people. I mean, that definitely would not work, neither for us as a team, nor for the investors who we have very painstakingly attracted based on alignment on the mission. So I think, we always say, if we have to stand down on the development of the polymetallic nodule resource, that means we have discovered something amazing about deep seas, environment that we haven't known before. So that would be a contribution to science. And, we would turn away and try to do our best, given that we know the terrestrial mining quite well. And if that's the only option that remains for the bridge to, fully recycle, that's something we might end up doing. But it's hard when you have such, falling grades of a resource. It's hard when it's lies under old growth rainforests that take, hundreds, sometimes thousands of years to get back to the same carbon sequestration, servicing capacity. It's definitely not an easy issue.
Yeah, indeed. Now, I'm wondering if you can also, there were some comments, and I noticed on Sean's slide, there was a quotation from Tonga as well. Could you comment on your small island developing state partners and how they are intersecting with these kinds of debates, particularly, and environmental management issues?
They are unusually, I mean, I can myself comment more on the Kingdom of Tonga and Nauru. I, just personally have not had as much exposure to Kiribati as other people on the team have. They bring a very interesting perspective to, to the very endeavor. I think, if you take Nauru in particular, they've been burned by mining, especially the colonial version of mining. And we're still trying to help them figure out how to rehabilitate part of the island that has been mined out. But they have a long-term. I mean, they're not as. I mean, ocean is. They're surrounded by, that's their way of life. So they have what they bring to the table is a very constructive relationship with the ocean, I guess. It's they're quite aware of the fact that you don't want to undermine anything, any underlying ecosystems. Yet, there are gifts and resources that could be extracted from the ocean if it's done right. So I think they're very much focused on the done right part. And of course, the long-term benefits that would accrue to them are also important. But the done right conversation is kind of dominating, most of these discussions.
Indeed, yep. So that's going to be another area where some kind of specific dialogue in the context of what we call the Samoa pathway with regard to small island developing states development trajectories might be an area to engage on in terms of environmental peace building. So we're coming to close to the end of the hour. I would like to give all the panelists a final parting word of 30 seconds. Please do recall the chat questions which are there. Maybe if you'd like to provide your contact details, some of the participants may want to follow up with you. We will have this available online as well, posted. And I would encourage all of the participants to also come to the second part of the symposium, where we will talk about space mining, and we'll also have some words from Professor Erika from the Environmental Peacebuilding Association at the end of the full symposium. So that will be at 4 p.m. US Eastern Daylight Time, which is still, I think, within the prospect of waking hours in Europe. And we have a speaker from Australia, which is one of the reasons why we held it at that hour. So parting words first from Winnie. 30 seconds.
Thank you, Saleem, for hosting this session. I also learned a lot from the two other speakers, and it's a topic that is very complex, as you saw also in the discussions in the chat box. What we want to highlight is that it is a decision-making where the result of the decision may have lasting impact for generations to come. And given the amount of information we have today, and the information that is still in development, participatory decision-making is very important, especially in a context where we are information starved and the decision is important. So this is a call to those who are stakeholders on this topic, but are not yet engaged in this topic, to be a part of this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
Yes, thank you, Saleem. I think a takeaway and a sort of closing message that I would like to leave with is these discussions are so important. So thank you to you, and thank you to the Peacebuilding Institute for hosting this, because only by bringing all of these new voices in, only by listening to each other, will we stand the best chance of mapping our way forward on this complex topic. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sean. Erika?
I can only second Sean's and Winnie's gratitude for bringing it together. And I'm actually also encouraged by the level, kind of, we're now moving away from yes, no, black and white, right? Even Sean's, position is conditional upon, I think actually there's a lot of, I do believe very deeply that everybody, on this panel wants to do the right thing for the planet and the people. I have zero doubt about intentions here. So I think that's a great platform to start with. And, the rest, it's a complex issue and requires time and a lot of time spent together.
And one of the things we are doing at the University of Delaware, thank you to all of you and the participants, but to alert you that we are offering the world's first 4-credit course on deep sea mining in the summer, which is going to be taught by Andrew Thaler, who many of the deep sea mining community would know. He edits the newsletter with the Pew Charitable Trusts on deep sea mining called Deep Sea Mining Observer. So he will be offering that as an online course. So people who are interested, definitely keep a lookout for further information on that. And we also are very keen to make sure that students in all various fields, natural sciences, social sciences, are able to appreciate the importance of such convergent conversations. So thank you to all. I hope to see many of you in the second part of the forum. Thanks to the Peace Building Association, particularly, and we have had a very diverse group of participants, including students. We had the director of IRMA, Amy Boulanger, I'm happy to say is also attending. IRMA is the Institute for Responsible Mining Assurance, and they have developed probably the best standard for certifying mines, and has a great governance system, including NGOs being part of that. So I think we've had really important players in listening, and hopefully we'll continue the conversation. Thank you all. See you soon, hopefully again on the next round. Cheers.